Yeah. Ooh, look. Gotta love the notice that Zoom is now giving to folks. Makes me think there's a few lawsuits at least in play that got them to that place. That's just me and my lawyer brain thinking about this stuff. Also love the notice that. All right. And Kendall, can we get a text to Chief Sherrill, please? Thank you.
We're waiting.
Hey, there's Jessica. Welcome in, Jessica. I've just gone over everything with everyone. So we've got about an hour before we call on y'all to give your 1 point. Jessica, I'm really hoping you can do that great connection you do around the water systems and the energy system, which I just don't think people have really connected the dots to. So I want to encourage that from you, if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you. I don't know, my saying my camera can't open for some reason, but I can definitely hear you, Colette. So I'm trying to troubleshoot with my camera.
Okay, excellent. And I'll just let you and Andronika know we are live on YouTube. So we're not, the meeting hasn't started officially, but we are up in someone's realm somewhere. And Andronika, is your camera working? Oh, she's coming in on audio. Okay. Gotta love technology and Zoom calls. Gotta love it. I know I do.
Colette, do you mind if I start letting members of the public in?
Yeah, go ahead and let's get this party started.
And I'll restart our recording.
All right, welcome in, everyone. So great to see so many of you. I see members of the great state of Louisiana coming in. I see members of the Equity Advisory Group. Welcome in. If you are familiar with the Zoom, thank you for joining us. And we got a question for you in the Zoom. If you do the Zoom chat, it's just a little button at the bottom. It says chat. If you click on it, we got a question. Where are you calling in from today? What parish are you in? What's one thing you love about Louisiana? One thing you love about Louisiana. Where are you calling in from? What's one thing you love about Louisiana? In the meantime, I'll get the meeting started. It's so great to see everyone. My name is Colette Pichon Battle. I am the chair of the Equity Advisory Group for the Governor's Climate Initiatives Task Force. So honored to be here today. And we're gonna have ourselves a good special meeting on equity. And we're gonna ask each of you to please keep yourselves muted through the call so that we can have great sound quality and we can hear everyone. We'll also ask that folks listen for some instructions. This is going to be a little bit of a different meeting, but we're going to have some different people speaking and then we'll ask for public comment at the end. We're really hoping that y'all will join us in on that. We're going to start off hearing a little bit from the governor's office to get us officially started, and then we'll have some remarks from myself and Chief Sherrill. I believe she's coming in now to join us. And then we will hear from some tribal elders across Louisiana. We'll then go into a panel discussion from some of our experts, and we'll have some public comments after that. Okay, so glad to have everyone here. I'm going to officially call the meeting to order. I'm going to turn it over to Harry Warhoff of the Governor's Office to give us some remarks. Harry, over to you, friend.
Thank you very much, Colette. My name is Harry Warhoff with the Governor's Office of Coastal Activities, and privileged enough to serve as the chair of the Climate Initiatives Task Force. First, I'll be pretty brief, but I want to first thank Colette and your team and Kendall for putting together this very thoughtful agenda for tonight. I also want to thank our speakers and everyone else really who's here with us tonight for taking the time. We recognize that it's not always easy for people to come to these kinds of public meetings. That's true in normal times, but it's even more so when people are still reeling from the impacts of Hurricane Ida. Many people remain displaced because their homes were damaged or destroyed. Over 17,000 people, customers still remain without power, and a boil water advisory remains in effect for Lafourche Parish. That's in addition to the 30 people who lost their lives due to the storm And that's in addition to all those people in Southwest Louisiana that are still very much in recovery mode after Hurricanes Laura and Delta. Now, I know some of us don't need any, that kind of a reminder, but I say this just because it needs to be front of mind for all those who are spared from the worst impacts of these storms, and these topics of, power, housing, food systems, water systems are all topics that we'll be diving into tonight. One of the values of is guiding the Governor's Climate Task Force is transparency and public involvement. In addition to the robust discussion that we'll have tonight, I want to make sure that everyone's aware that we have a draft climate action plan out for public comment right now. It's on the governor's website at gov.louisiana.gov under the programs tab. You can email in your comments at climate.la.gov through October 8th. We'll have another public comment period later this year. So if you're unable to comment this go around, there will be another opportunity to weigh in. And I encourage everyone who wishes to submit a comment to please go ahead and do so. The key word in climate action plan isn't plan, but it's action. And we need action now more than ever. And I don't think it's any more apparent than it is today. And action is more achievable when more and more people are saying that there is no other option than action. And so I thank you again for being here tonight, and I'll turn it over to my colleague, Lindsay Cooper, right now. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Harry. I'm just going to call our roll real quick for the Equity Advisory Group members. For those of you that are joining us from the public for the first time, the Equity Advisory Group is one of our 10 subgroups of the Louisiana Climate Task Force. And I'll just call our membership, the roll for our membership to start us off tonight. And then I'll give just a brief overview presentation of what the Climate Task Force is, what are we doing, what are we up to, and then pass it back to Colette and Chief to run through what we want to focus on and talk about tonight. So Equity Advisory members, since there are a lot of people on the call tonight, if you could just unmute yourself and state that you're here when I call your name. Chair Colette Pichon-Battle.
Here.
Ashley Verdier. Charles Allen.
Here.
Dr. Craig Colton.
Here.
Dr. David Robinson Morris.
Here.
Jasmine Brown. Here. Dr. Kenny Cole.
Here.
Larry Saraparu. Rodney Wallace. Chief Sherelle Parfait Darga. And Steve Cochran.
I did see Chief Sherelle just come in. I don't know if she knows we're calling roll. Chief, if you're there, they just want you to say you're here.
I'm here. Thank you.
Hi, Chief. And Liz William Russell.
Here.
Got an extra guest tonight, Liz.
I did.
Okay, everyone, I'm going to share my screen real quick. Oh, and I do see a message in the chat from Larry that he's here, but his mic is not working. Larry, I got you down. Well, able to see my screen. There we go.
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. So as Colette mentioned, we'll start with just an overview of the task force, building on the remarks that Harry gave, and then spend most of the first hour hearing from members of our Indigenous communities, led by Chief Sherelle, who's one of our task force members, and a member of the Equity Advisory Group. And the second hour will be a panel discussion to interact with all of you members of the public that have joined us and engaged with us on how we can better build climate solutions that enhance resilience and prepare us for the next storm, understanding that we're still in the middle of hurricane season. And as Harry mentioned, we're still in the midst of recovery from Hurricane Ida. So with that in mind, I'll start with just the reason why we're here. So the governor set these emission reduction targets in last August, and these emission reduction targets set a short, a medium, and a long-term goal for Louisiana that we would reduce our emissions by 100% by 2050 with interim targets to help us make sure that we get there. This is in line with what 25 other states have done, with what the Paris Agreement calls for. So it's very on target with what we've seen a lot of other national and international leaders do in Louisiana. Having our emission footprint, we are on the forefront of climate action. We're also on the forefront of seeing the impacts of climate change. There are countless reports. There's a new IPCC report this August, and some pretty compelling evidence that we just see every day around us on the impacts of climate change. And that realization and that understanding of that we can't just avoid or adapt to the impacts of climate change have led to a lot of the momentum around Louisiana beginning to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So on the left side of this page, I'm just showing you all the context of climate action in Louisiana that our team put together and is out for public comment right now. This is just laying out the context of what we've been seeing. What is the impact of climate change? What is climate action? What does that look like for Louisiana? So I encourage you all to read through that context document, provide comments to us all by October 8th. And just a little bit on our task force, as I mentioned, we have 10 subgroups underneath our task force. Our task force is 23 members, and all of our groups together bring us to over 150 members from all sectors, from government, NGO, advocacy, industry, and the private sector, academia, our indigenous people and tribal communities. And these groups have met 40 times over the past year through the task force, through sector committees, our advisory groups, through workshops, a lot of different ways of interacting with all of these stakeholders. But we know that they are representatives of certain groups and represented on different sectors and charges of these individual subgroups of the task force. But it's also very important to us to engage with the public directly in this that aren't on the task force itself. And to keep us on the streamlined process as much as we can with 150 stakeholders and 40 public meetings, we've been following this decision-making process that is bringing together science and policy, helping us root the decisions that we're making, the actions that we're considering in our objectives. So I list those out in the green on the right side of the screen. It does matter to us in reducing our net greenhouse gas emissions. It does matter that we're minimizing and reducing that number so that we can meet our emission reduction targets. But it also matters that we're improving the quality of life of our residents, that we're creating a more equitable society, that we have short and long-term success, that we're strengthening our economy, we're conserving our natural resources, we're adapting to climate change. So we've held these values central at every step in the process that we're in right now. And we're about at step 4 now on the home stretch of creating our action plan, but have grounded each of the steps in these objectives. And what we've been working on this summer as the task force and as the governor's staff is putting together what should a portfolio of strategies and actions look like for Louisiana and how we address climate change. So our strategies are our high-level visions. They're going to set that ambitious path forward for Louisiana. And then the actions are the specific policies, programs, and projects that fit underneath the strategies because they're going to help us attain those strategies. We know that over time, those actions might need to be switched out. There might be new technology, new research, new funding that becomes available. And we might find that the solutions we have now are outdated and we need to switch out actions over time, but grounding that in those overarching strategies. And that leads to the other document that we have out for public comment right now, which is called our draft climate portfolio. And I put a snapshot of it on the right side of the screen just to show you what a strategy and what actions look like. It's a lot of information. It's about 30 to 40 pages. So I encourage you to read through the sections that interest you the most or where you're engaged the most. And we'll try to break it down a little bit tonight as we talk. But of those sections, just at a very high level, we talk through actions of energy transition, knowing that pretty much every other state that's developed an action plan is centered on clean energy. Industrial decarbonization is kind of a unique approach for Louisiana since industry is a majority of our emissions. We also focus on safe and resilient energy and infrastructure, just knowing our location and that we do have a lot of storms and that resilience of infrastructure is really important for us. Managing our methane emissions from our oil and gas infrastructure, decarbonizing transportation, development, the built environment, our natural and working lands, enhancing those natural sinks. And then these last three sections focus on the economy, the partnerships that are necessary to make this happen, and then how do we ensure that there is lasting success in this work. And I will say that it's going to require a lot of partnerships and collaboration to reach our goals, to implement all of these actions, almost 100 actions that we've listed out in this draft. But with that, this is just a draft portfolio that's been released, and we'll be working to refine it and build it more as we move into the fall. So we do really welcome your feedback on the portfolio here. Just to show you all how far we've come since the beginning of this process, we have developed that action portfolio I just showed you based off of 178 action proposals that you all as members of the public, our committees and advisory groups submitted to us. It was a pretty rigorous template, about 10 pages, and it was pretty incredible. The actions that we did receive, 178 in all, and we spent a lot of the spring and fall, the spring and summer working with our committees and working internally in the governor's office to reorganize, to refine, combine, gap fill, group our strategies. That's how we've come to this draft portfolio, as you see on the bottom right. Where you see that plus minus sign, the draft portfolio is undergoing public comment, but it's also undergoing an analysis by our advisory groups. So one of those advisory groups is the Equity Advisory Group. We also have the Science Advisory Group, Legal, and Economics and Finance. So looking at the portfolio through all four of those lenses, our advisors are providing us with tangible feedback on how the portfolio impacts our objectives. Also, the committees are providing more technical feedback on where there might be gaps or just technical content errors. And then that will lead us through the fall where we're making revisions to the portfolio and then report out to the task force. Or the task force reports out on the final report as we get into the next year. So in making that analysis, as I mentioned, we care about reducing emissions. We'll be using a tool to help us define how much the portfolio reduces emissions, but we also care about those other objectives, which is what the advisory groups will be helping to inform. Just to show you all before I hand it back over to our chair, the upcoming schedule, as I mentioned, the public comment period is due on both of those documents, October 8th, but we do have 3 big meetings upcoming for the task force. We have 2 meetings focused on industrial decarbonization, October 8th and October 19th, and the task force meeting, the normal October task force meeting where we'll report out on all the feedback that we get throughout this month is October 26th. And our goal is to release a draft plan mid-November. So with that, I will take any questions, but hand it back over to our chair.
Great. Thank you, Lindsay. I saw lots of folks looking at the chart. Are there any questions before we shift over just on what you heard and how things have been laid out and where things are moving? Okay, great. Well, I just want to give a lot of love and respect to the governor's staff that have been working really hard with all of us and have made themselves available, especially for questions and just learning about what's happening and getting documents and things like that. So I just want to say we've got at least some access to a lot that was just condensed in a little bit of time. If you need to see any of these things, there are documents for you to go through. And I want to encourage folks to go to the website. A lot of these things, including these meetings, are put up on the website specifically for the community to be able to take a look at. So thank you, Lindsay. I am going to just get us all the way in here. And so I just want to say again, thank you for all who have joined us. Bonjour, y'all, is my official greeting. That's a little Bayou evening greeting for all of you. And if you haven't put your name, not your name, I'm sorry, where you're calling from, what parish you're calling from, and one thing you love about Louisiana in the chat, we want to encourage you to do that just so we can see who's on the line with us tonight. And we're just grounded in what we love about this great state of ours. So just thank you for doing that. And we're saying hello to each of you. I'm the executive director of the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy. I'm located in St. Tammany, and I am really excited to be a member of this climate task force and to chair this equity advisory group. I remember when I was first being asked about it, the question around equity was there from the very beginning, and I'm just really proud of this state and our governor for even creating this task force to begin what's been a really difficult conversation about our reality. And if we take off the coloring of the politic, we know that Louisiana is on the front lines of this global climate crisis, whether, no matter where you sit, we're all feeling the reality of that. So I'm really honored to chair this equity advisory group because the key to any climate action that protects our people and our culture for the long term is going to have equity at the center. We have an opportunity and an obligation to make sure all of our solutions advance equity and center people. Because at the end of the day, this is our state and we're all here. And what is this great state without its great people? So this is really the session that we're having today. We want to hear from our folks around what's going on. And this is a special meeting of the Equity Advisory Group. So it's going to be a little bit different, as we've said a few times. The first thing that's different about this meeting is that we're having it after hours. So, cheers to everyone who's having a little wine, little dinner with the meeting. We appreciate it. And thank y'all for making time. We also heard that for some people, going to meetings in the middle of the day is difficult. So we wanted to try to make this a little bit more accessible to hear from folks. So we thank you for sticking in with us on that. This is also different because we want the Equity Advisory Group members. So you heard Lindsay do the roll call. And there are members on the Equity Advisory Group who are here tonight to make sure they hear from the community. We are all tasked to give our opinions on what has been put in front of us as actions, as Lindsay said, 100 actions. But we need to know that how we're speaking on this task force is informed by the community. So we're really going to make a lot of space this evening to hear from the community. And the Equity Advisory Group members are really listening in to who speaks tonight. And we also want to point out a correction that Chief Sherrill has brought up many times, I believe once in a task force meeting, which is that we've got to bring in more Indigenous voices and we've got to hear from these communities that are often invisibilized. So we will make some space to do that today. You'll see us take some time and care to make sure that we do that so that we are hearing from the original peoples of this state. And we're hearing from the longstanding and historic communities of this state, including communities that were created after the Emancipation Proclamation and are now, in very frontline situations around the climate crisis. So that's why you're going to see this move a little differently today, but we've gone over the format a few times. And Chief Sherrill, I'm not sure if you're ready, but we're ready for you. I want to turn it over to you to offer just a little bit of framing around the reality of some of the Indigenous communities here. And then after we hear from you, we'll do a little bit of a roll call of some other chiefs and leaders that we heard might be joining the call today and just make some space for them. So Chief Sherrill, let me turn it over to you to offer your remarks, please.
Hi, everyone. Chief Sherrill Parfait Dordor here. And yes, I live in a community that is considered a frontline community. This is my home, or what's left of it behind me. We are still in the response phase of Hurricane Ida. We have people that are without homes and are still looking for safe shelter, and there is movement on that. Many thanks to our legislators and everyone that has heard our cry for help for people. And I'm really honored to have been included as one of the members of the climate task force, because what has happened here is a perfect example of what is going to continue to happen if we do not take this seriously, and if we do not listen to the science and the wisdom of traditional ecological knowledge in respecting our environment and our planet. So I'm just, please forgive me. I've been in response mode all day, but just really, really thankful to be here and to be able to contribute and hopefully be a part of creating a much better path forward for our beautiful state and all of our amazing people. So thank y'all so much.
Thank you, Chief Sherrill. And we send our love and our prayers to you and to the communities in Terrebonne, Lafourche, Plaquemines, Jefferson, St. Tammany, still recovering. We all know, so many of us know that feeling, but we lift up your words around the imminent and the climate crisis and the way it impacts our communities and what we have to start taking seriously, or else we will all be in this position, and we've heard that. So we just want to encourage everyone to send love and prayers down to our family that is still recovering. So I want to make some space, unfortunately, but which should be taken into consideration. Many of our tribal leaders are in the exact same situation. Folks that we had reached out to are actually in recovery mode. We were able to speak with Principal Chief August Crapell of the Homa Nation. The Homa Nation was doing some deliveries down to Ironton and Plaquemines yesterday, and they've just been working really hard to make sure everybody around those 6 parishes has what they need. It's a beautiful moment. We talked with Miss Audrey Trufant-Selvant down in Plaquemines Parish in Ironton, who said that this storm was worse than Katrina. 5 times worse was the word she used, because of where that storm hit and where the levee protection system is. And she said that it was worse than Katrina for everyone. I believe 4 houses are standing. The community is almost a ghost town. And we are still reaching out to hear from other Indigenous leaders. I'm asking Kendall to check check as folks come in, but let me just pause to see if there are any tribal members or other Indigenous leaders on the call now. If you would like to offer your remarks, our question is really just, can we hear about your community, where you're located, and then can we hear about how climate is impacting your community, and we'll go from there. Let me ask one more time for folks to mute themselves if they're not already muted. Someone's watching Bugs Bunny, and it is a rabbit. And if you can mute, that would be great. And thanks. But are there any tribal leaders or Indigenous peoples on the call who would like to speak now? I love it. The host muted everyone. That was smart. Got to learn that trick. All right, great. Thank you. All right, I'm not seeing anyone in the chat, any Indigenous leaders into the chat. So let me just offer other longstanding communities. We know that we have, well, we were gonna ask for Ms. Sharon Levine of Rise St. James Parish. If you're on the call now, Ms. Sharon, we would like to move to longstanding communities, and then we'll ask others who are in longstanding historic Louisiana communities to speak as well. Ms. Sharon, are you here? If so, are you ready to offer your comments about who your community is and how climate is impacting your community?
Yes, I'm here, Colette. Thank you for having me. I'm from St. James Parish. Right now, I'm in St. Gabriel because my home was destroyed in Hurricane Ida, and I didn't have anywhere to go. So my granddaughter bought a home in St. Gabriel. That's where I am right now. But I go back to my house every day to see what's going on with the house. I've had problems with my insurance company. I had problems with my roofing company. And when Hurricane Ida was told it would be here, we were not prepared. We didn't have any instruction from our parish president. And I stayed because I felt like I would be able to get more done if there was any damage that I could handle, because I knew it would be bad, but not as bad as it was. It was worse than Hurricane Betsy. When I was a little girl, Hurricane Betsy was a real bad hurricane. And then Ida was something else. When I saw my metal roof flying off my roof, I stood by my window and I looked at it fly away. And then the next morning, I got up, we rode around town to see the damages to other people. When I saw the people, their roofs off of their homes, I stopped to talk to some people. They were crying because they didn't have anywhere to go. They didn't want to go into public housing. They wanted their own home. And immediately I tried to help them. But in the process of all of that, the industry took advantage of our weaknesses, and they were polluting even more. Right here in St. James in the 5th District, I took pictures of what they were doing. I did live streams to let the public know, and to let the public know that our parish president wasn't doing anything to help the citizens or to give us any kind of assistance. So people came to me because they know I'm the president of Rise St. James, and they asked for help. And they wanted me to do a live stream and tell how they are not getting any assistance. Elderly people were asking for help. So I did a live stream calling on the president of St. James Parish, asking him to help these people because they were giving out water and ice, but they weren't giving it into our area. So that's why I called on him. And a few days later, he was there in the 5th District distributing bottled water. So Rise St. James is a big asset to St. James Parish because we go from the East Bank to the West Bank. We go all over the parish to see what's going on and to see who we can help. We have people that come in from New Orleans and other areas to help with what's going on with the construction of different things and to put tarps on roofs. And it all coming through Rise St. James because they asking us what we need and what kind of help they can give us. So they direct their concerns to Rise St. James, and we pass it on to the workers, and they go out and help the people in the community. We have been given donations from other organizations to help us to try to recover. We have passed out, we distribute cleaning supplies and different things that people might need just to get by. We were out of electricity for 2 weeks, and then now we out of our internet service because I don't have a home to stay in at all. And I had problems with the roofing company because they came to put a tarp on my roof 4 times and they didn't do it right. I called the company, I complained, and today they came after the water have destroyed all of my furniture. If they would have tarped my roof right, I would have been able to save some of my furniture. So all my furniture is destroyed now. My clothes is destroyed. Some of my clothes is destroyed. And I hope my robe that I sing at church is not destroyed. So it's hard because the insurance company is taking so long and they won't give me hardly anything for my dwelling. So it's hard. And we stand strong. We still standing because it could have been worse.
Yeah.
And I praise God that we're still here. And it's going to get better. And one day I'll be able to rebuild my home. And I want to stay right there in St. James in my home. So I thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Sharon. And I just want to say on behalf of all of us in Louisiana, we want to say thank you for your leadership. I'm not sure that folks on this call know that Ms. Sharon Levine is the most recent recipient of the Goldman Prize, which is only awarded one person on the continent to get that prize. And the person on this continent who got it was Sharon Levine of St. James Parish, Louisiana. And the work being done because of the community involvement which is something we don't hear about when we think about climate change. Like, what is the role of community organizations? How do we strengthen them? How do we make sure that organizations that know their community are helping to advance work, advance recovery? And I'm also hearing issues with physical property, like what happens to your house in these climate disasters. But then it goes further. You got to deal with insurance now. You're dealing with all of these other situations. So when we talk about disaster, we're not just talking about the hurricane coming on shore. We're talking about all of the ripple effects of that and what that does to our community. Thank you so much, Ms. Sharon. We appreciate you. And let me just, yes, thank you. And let me just see, I see we got a few other folks. So we're looking now, or making space now for folks who identify as Indigenous or Native to Turtle Island, and or you're coming from a historic community. A lot of these communities that were established after the Emancipation Proclamation. Let me just see if there's anyone else. Kendall, let me look to you for anyone on the list here. Okay.
I know we got some people, but
Okay,
they seem to be a bit shy.
No, I see we have Miss Myrtle coming off of mute. Miss Myrtle, would you like to speak in? If you could just tell us where you're calling in from, please.
Yes, I'm calling in from Gonzales, Louisiana right now. My home was also destroyed, like Ms. Levine said. My roof flew off. A metal roof just flew from my house. I live on the front line near Nuco, Mosaic, Occidental, all the chemical companies there. And I feel to believe that some of the chemicals play a role in destroying your homes where they cannot withstand the hurricanes anymore. Ida was one of the worst hurricanes that I have ever witnessed in all my life. I was a young girl, like Miss Levine said, when Bessie passed, and Bessie was terrible. But Ida surpassed Betsy. I was home, my sister and I heard when my roof cracked. And I got up off the sofa and I looked and I saw my roof by my back door. So I was afraid because I have a Generac generator. And a friend of mine told me that the last hurricane they had one in the tree had fallen on theirs. And her husband had to hurry him go outside to turn it off because it probably would have made the house catch on fire. So I was afraid. I was afraid to even open the door to go out because I know they had wires all over. So I got on the phone and I called 911. The operator, when I spoke to her, I told her what had happened and I was afraid. And she said that the weather is bad. And I understood that and I knew it was. But she said, as soon as the weather calms down some and I could send a deputy out, I will send a deputy to check on you. That deputy haven't arrived at my house yet. And that is very disappointing, devastating, and anything else that you might call it, to say that you live in a parish where you have to almost fend for yourself.
Thank you, Ms. Myrtle. And I really appreciate your comments. May I ask, you said something, the chemicals around you got a gut feeling, maybe you don't know, but if you think that the chemicals around has something to do with the house's ability to withstand the storms. Can you talk a little bit more about what you're speaking about? What chemicals are we talking about? How might that impact the house?
Well, a couple weeks ago, Nucor Steel have been poisoning the community with sulfuric acid for 6 whole years. No one never called us to tell us anything about it. We had to find out from Tulane Law Clinic that this was happening. And I have had suspicion for years. My roof was totally a different color from what it had been. And it can't be anything else but.
I understand. If your house is being exposed to things either in the air or at the foundation, it might be weaker when the storm comes, and some of these things might I understand. Thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you, Ms. Myrtle. Thank you, Ms. Sharon. Appreciate hearing from both of you. I know we'll hear from Mr. Robert Taylor a little bit later. Let me just see, I believe we may have been joined by Chief Troy. Let me just make sure, Kendall, do we have Chief Troy on the phone? If so, we want to just offer deference to Indigenous voices right now and voices from longstanding communities. Kendall, can you help me maneuver that?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, okay, thank you. I'm sorry, Chief. I can't see everybody all at one time, but I could see a note that you made it in. We want to welcome you. This is an honor to have you in. We've heard from Chief Sherelle Parfait Dardar speaking about just who her community is and how climate change has impacted her community. And we want to just hear from you, just your greeting, who your community is and how climate change has impacted your community. We've got about 3 minutes of space for you to just offer your thoughts here.
Well, I don't really have any thoughts right at this time. I would rather just listen, especially to the people down south Louisiana.
Absolutely.
You know, we've the most trouble that we've had up here is just heat, and you know, every now and then we get too much water, which kills off our vegetation, and people, you know, their watermelons and stuff like that. But it really hasn't been that bad. It's just beginning. We're in the beginning stages. You guys are in, you know, down South Louisiana. They're horrible. It's horrible down there. So.
And can you tell us a little bit about your tribe and where you're located right now, where you're calling in from?
I'm calling in from Stonewall, Louisiana. My tribe, most of my people are in a place called Sampersan, which means blood for blood. And then by Seep, down around Derry, Louisiana, or from you guys up around Derry, Louisiana, it's Clucherville. And if you're going up I-49 and you see a sign that says Chopin, it's spelled like chopping, but it is actually Chopin is how it's pronounced by the native folks around there. So just a little insight on that. But yeah, we're in the middle part of the state. We're north of Pineville and south of Natchitoches. So.
And that's the Appalachee tribe, Chief?
The Appalachee Tolly Molly Band, yes.
All right, excellent.
Yes.
I'm curious, just thinking about some of the heat. I know y'all we're seeing the storms go through Louisiana, you know, still at hurricane strength all the way up through the center and the top. But I'm curious, the heat seems to be a question that everyone's paying attention to or starting to pay attention to. I'm curious if this is even a conversation at the community level. Are folks noticing a difference or a change? Is it impacting life to the point where folks are starting to talk about the climate impacts, or where are things with the community?
Right now, they're not really, it's not really a big topic right now, but there are a few folks that have mentioned it. You know, I mean, it's they're losing some of their crops, like some of their corn and stuff like that. But we're just, you know, I basically right now I'm at the stage of just listening and learning.
Yes.
So I'm that way I can help maybe in the future when stuff, you know, when stuff really starts getting as bad as it is down in South Louisiana. I mean, I went down there not long ago just for a minute, you know, and I was like, wow, you know, and then I see the pictures of what we call up here the fingers down in South Louisiana, and they're just disappearing. I mean, they're not. If you look at pictures from 20 years ago versus now, it's a huge difference. And then most of those folks live down there are Native Americans, and they're losing their land, they're losing their homes, their livelihood, you know. So. Yeah. And it's just a bad situation for them down there.
That's right. And thank you for lifting them up. I can see there's a thing called a chat here, Chief, and Chief Sherelle is saying thank you for joining us. And I know we want to just say thank you for being here. we're looking to make sure we do a little bit better in including Indigenous voices in public spaces and public comments. And just having you here means a lot to us. I think it's important to
Thank
lift up too yes, sir. I think it's important to lift up too, you're mentioning food, you're mentioning, what folks are really struggling with. And some of this has got to be the dots that we put together, right? This is not just about a storm coming ashore. This is about people's houses, people's livelihood. This is about the chemical interaction when these floods and storms happen. This is about people's food. And if we look at what folks said they like in the chat at the very beginning, folks who have chimed in, folks are saying, we love the food, we love the culture, we love the people. And this new climate reality is threatening all of that. And so it's important for us to just start connecting some dots here. I also see, thanks Camille, sulfuric acid erodes most metals. So that is from a land use person, Miss Myrtle, that gut feeling of yours might be right on. Someone is saying that makes a lot of sense. So thanks. Well, we're going to keep this conversation going. I just want to make sure we weren't joined by any other Indigenous leaders or tribal members before we move on to the second part of our conversation, where we'll hear from some local experts working on food and energy and health to help us take this conversation a little broader and a little deeper. Let me just make sure there are no more Indigenous leaders, tribal members on the call who want to speak. Longstanding community members. Okay. All right. All right. Well, let's keep these stories in mind, y'all. We've heard from two chiefs, two leaders in historic Black communities. It's important for us to honor and acknowledge the reality that's happening in Louisiana. As we're talking about emissions, we have to remember the people, and which people are we talking about? And speaking of people, I've got a few folks to introduce you to. We are gonna shift a little bit and broaden the conversation. And we wanna really make sure that we not just talk about problems, but really hone in on some of the solutions that exist so many places, especially in our communities. And so we're gonna hear from some folks today who are gonna help us to really understand some of the solutions around housing, water, food, energy, health, and healthcare, and the solutions that will also reduce emissions while they strengthen our access to these basic necessities and prioritize equity. We have some experts here to tell us about some of these solutions that should be a part of any equitable climate plan. And we're gonna ask them to introduce themselves. I'll call on them. They'll be introducing themselves by talking to you a little bit about their organization, telling you one easy thing we could do right now, meaning there's solutions already available to us, but really starting to put together that climate is not one issue. And this is not just about CO2 emissions. This is about what happens to our broader society. We're gonna look for the community to ask some questions in. So the panel conversation that we're going to have will be prompted by questions from the audience. We'll get some instructions here, but I think it's a great time to put into the chat that official public comment can be submitted at the regular email. Lindsay or Kendall, if someone can say that email out loud, just so folks know where to submit official public comment.
That is climate@la.gov.
Great. So official public comment for this meeting will be taken. Those get read into the record and that becomes part of the official record. So we'll be asking you to join in via voice, but also if you would like to submit your official record, to please do that as well. So let me introduce you to our panelists, and we're gonna ask our panelists one simple solution in your sector that will help us preserve our people and our culture, advance equity, nice and easy. We are gonna hear first from Anjanika Morris, who is the Executive Director of the Greater New Orleans Housing Alliance. We will then hear from Jessica Dandridge, who's the Executive Director of New Orleans Water Collaborative. We will then go to Marguerite Green, who is the Executive Director of Sprout. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Kenny Cole, Systems Vice President of Clinical Improvement at Ochsner Health Systems. And then we'll hear from Logan Burke, Executive Director of the Alliance for Affordable Energy. Let me start off with you, Anjanika. Can you tell us a little bit about you, your organization, and then one solution that's right there, right in front of us that we could be thinking about from the housing perspective.
Good evening, Colette, and thank you for having me on here tonight and this and hosting this amazing event so that people can participate more in the climate task force and understand that there is an equity priority inside of this work. So I'm Andronika Morris, as Colette said, and our work is around getting to the place where we can guarantee housing for all, because we think that that is a part. That's the foundation for any solution to achieve a just society and equitable society. Bringing down the heavily racialized stigma around affordable housing, subsidized housing, is a huge barrier. The things that we tend to think of people wanting housing guaranteed as something for poor people, something for lazy, shiftless people, and more often than not, Black and brown people. And this is a part of climate change because, as Colette said earlier, what we're talking about with climate intensified storms is people losing their homes. And I believe that climate change is Mother Nature attempting to evict us for cause because we've been messing up property. So we might want to figure out how to stop that. And again, it starts with helping people be safe, cut down their own personal emissions, and what we could do right now in response to this tragedy, in response to this climate fuel tragedy, is make sure that everyone has a safe, decent place to rest tonight. Chief Sherrill has talked about what she is going through. You heard Ms. Levine talk about it. There are vacant homes. There are vacant hotel rooms crisscrossing the state. Our local and state and federal government have the ability, and most importantly, the funding to access those properties and to make them available. And that must be done, and that should be done, and it should always be done. And if we were guaranteeing housing, it wouldn't matter if it was Hurricane Ida, if it was COVID that cost your housing, or if it was just Tuesday and you lost your housing, you would always have somewhere to go. And that's what we need to build the foundation to address the rest of our problems.
All right. Thank you, Andronika. Hearing housing for everyone, safe and affordable housing for all, for the long term. This is part of the climate conversation because we're people. We got to be here. We got to be in this moment, and we have to have some standards around housing. Let's move from housing to water, where I want to ask Jessica Dandridge to join in here and to tell us a little bit about what's so upfront and easy about water, Jessica, that we could hear about. Can you tell us a little bit about you, your organization, and your answer on water?
Sure. Thank you, Colette, and thank you for everyone for having me, and good evening. Thank you again for all. I would echo Andronika. The stories have been absolutely amazing and touching, and it's powerful and moving, and I want to do as much as I can, as much as I possibly can, but I don't want to digress. I'm the director of Water Collaborative Greater New Orleans, which is an organization that is focused on making sure communities can live and thrive with water. And when we say live and thrive, we're really talking about several things, including green infrastructure and water management, which I'll talk about in just a moment, but also water justice, making sure everyone has access to affordable water, quality water, and that no matter what, despite their income level or wherever they live, that they will always have water. Too many communities in Louisiana, especially indigenous, have trouble getting water, but then we have communities in urban areas who can't afford water, and that is unacceptable. So we work across sectors to get that work done. And so when we're talking about equity, equity is really at the center of water, literally what water is about. But one of the biggest solutions, which I had just echoed, is green infrastructure or nature-based solutions. Many of you may have even heard of it, or maybe you've seen it but can't identify it. There are two types of infrastructure we're used to in the state of Louisiana. The one that we're most accustomed to is gray. That is our levee systems, our pumping systems, our canals, our drainage. And that's what we've depended on. But unfortunately, it has actually caused more damage than really benefited us. Of course, we need levees, but we didn't really need levees until we started draining. We were above sea level, and now we're not. We've destroyed our coastal wetlands to build more levees and more wetlands and all of that. So the green infrastructure is really focused on correcting a lot of those problems. It is really focused on, one, biomimicry, mimicking the land. going back to indigenous practices of caring for the land, and additionally maintaining and bringing that to urban areas that have never had that since we started developing areas across Southeast Louisiana. So how does it advance equity? One, it obviously reduces flooding, it reduces heat island effects, it reduces heat waves, and improves economic development and upward social mobility through high-paying jobs. But more than anything, it actually supports community health. It cleans the water, but it also cleans the air. It's good for the health and well-being, but also really good for value of homes in places that have historically seen redlining or environmental justice issues or disasters. In any of those areas, it improves across racial lines, backgrounds, economic, and urban and suburban areas. And it is one of the proven solutions to getting to climate equity. And those are the things that we've already been seeing in Louisiana that is actually working. And I will say that while water wasn't the biggest issue, it was an issue in places like Laplace, it was an issue in, we talked about Ironton, we are talking about Grand Isle, we're talking about Lafourche Parish, which was really about coastal. And that still applies to coastal, right? So coastal work and wetland restoration, wetland adaptation is really important. One of the things that we really need to do is building up both urban infrastructure and coastal infrastructure. And then that's how we're going to really get to equity, because water damage is one of the things that really hurts communities and is hard to come back from.
And I'm hearing that repair really needs to be focused in and leaning into that green infrastructure as opposed to that gray infrastructure. So when we hear all of these dollars going to infrastructure, we should be making sure that the green infrastructure that keeps our ecosystem and our environment healthy is where those investments are going.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Jessica. Let's keep this party going because we did housing and water. The only thing that Louisianians love more than where they live and what they drink is the food they eat. So let's go over to Marguerite Green of Sprout to talk to us a little bit about Sprout, but also what is some low-hanging fruit, around food and what we need to be considering with the impacts of climate change on our food and something simple that we could do right now, a solution that exists right now. Margie, let me turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Colette. So I guess first I'll start by saying I work at Sprout, and what we do is we're a nonprofit that does technical service and provides assistance for farmers and gardeners. So what we do is often navigational paperwork. We help people with sustainability plans, and we network those folks that are trying to grow food or grow more sustainably in their communities. We serve farmers all over Southeast and Southwest Louisiana. We go where we're called beyond that because there's not a lot of support in our state for food producing farmers and for farmers that are growing with more sustainable methods. And when you pose this question, Colette, as like, what is a simple and what is an immediate answer? I'm making these bulleted lists because food is it's the dots that are all connected. It's so complex. We've got federal programs and state programs, and with all this stuff swirling around, there's production, there's access. And what really immediately I was like, oh, there it is that we need to treat our food producing farmers, our sustainable farmers with the same love and respect that we treat our commodity farmers. It can be a both and the idea that we don't do that is sometimes alarming to people who aren't part of this system. When you think of a farmer, I think for the most part, people imagine a farmer who's growing food, but the reality of working in agriculture is that there are these amazing wraparound services, these programs, and really they're completely unattainable for folks who are growing food and folks who are trying to grow in ways that are more sustainable, that are perceived as progressive, but oftentimes are really traditional ways of growing that are incredibly respectful of the land, they're regenerative, and they're being really good stewards of the land, which, to be frank, is often expensive. One of the kind of clearest examples of this is that right now we're dealing with our farmers that we work with in Lafourche and Terrebonne, and we're seeing that non-insured disaster assistance program of crop insurance, the whole farm revenue protection. These are USDA programs, FSA programs for crop insurance. None of our food producing farmers are ever able to access them. The metrics that they have to meet, the paperwork that they have to do, in some cases they have to report every single time they're planting, which for a diversified vegetable farmer would mean nearly every day. So these are not programs that are suited for these farmers. And I think the easiest thing to say is that we just have to love them the same way we love those commodity farmers that are an economic engine for our state. But I would counter that what you nurture grows. And I think that those economic engine farmers, those commodity farmers, are not more economically successful simply because that model of farming is better. They are more successful. They drive the economy of the state because they've got that support. And so in terms of equity, you know, there are farmers of all stripes. There are Black and Indigenous farmers throughout the state. But one of the things that we know is when we look at the amount of land or the amount of capital that people have, it's incredibly inequitably distributed. And by supporting farmers who are growing food and farmers who are growing in regenerative ways, we actually would open the door to farmers who had less upfront capital, less land access, because vegetables have a higher profit margin. They feed us. That brings food closer to our communities. It keeps those dollars in our state. Local food amplifies its effect economically in our state. When we use our food dollars to buy food that's from somewhere else, we're both contributing to climate change, and also a lot of the time labor abuse, but we're also losing some of the impact of that dollar. So if we want to bring new people into farming, young people into farming, and oftentimes historical farming communities that have lost their land, that have had their land stolen, then we need to be supporting those farmers that are growing food and are growing with the land that they steward.
Wow. That's really great, Margie. Thank you. I never heard commodity versus food, but you're giving me something to think about. What are we just growing to produce, to push out versus what are we feeding our people with, and who has access to be able to do that? Especially when we think about disaster, right? Where lots of food comes in, but is it our local food? Is it our healthy food when folks are really needing it? And we could have more of it if we love the food, smaller farmers as much as we love those commodity commercial farmers. That was really helpful for me. Thank you. The only thing more important than the food we eat is what's happening to our bodies, what's happening to our health, what's happening to us. And Dr. Kenny Cole, I want to invite you into the conversation to really can you tell us a little bit about Ochsner Health Systems and what your role there is? And then can you talk to us about one simple thing, one maybe not simple, but it's really clear, it's really easy, and it's right there that we could do to help address this climate crisis and advance equity? Let me turn it over to you for your remarks.
Sure, thank you. My name is Kenny Cole. I'm a physician by training. I currently have an administrative role at Ochsner Health, and Ochsner has pledged, to the state that we want to help lead it from ranking 50th in health rankings in the United States to 40th by the year 2030. And so it's our 40 by 30 campaign, and we all take that pledge very seriously. That as the largest health system in the state, we have a role in advancing that cause and improving the health of the people of Louisiana. The one simple thing that we can all do, I'll sort of talk about it first individually and collectively. But to understand the simple thing, I actually want to set the stage first, which is that as a nation, we spend $3.5 trillion on healthcare. That 3.5 trillion is revenue for health plans, for health systems, for doctors, for administrators, and so forth. But it's expenditures for all the rest of us, right? Every one of us bears that expense collectively. And Louisiana, in addition to ranking, 50th in health, if you look at the top 10 highest spending regions in the entire nation, I can tell you that third on that list is Monroe, Louisiana. 5th is Lafayette, 6th is Alexandria, 7th is Shreveport, 8th is Baton Rouge, and 10th is Metairie. Out of hundreds of regions in the country that the Dartmouth Atlas Project has studied, Louisiana has 6 of the top 10 most expensive, highest spending regions in the entire country. And yet we're one of the poorest states in all of the country. And so one of the poorest states in the United States is spending more on healthcare than anywhere else, and yet what are we getting for it? We rank 50th. And so understanding the inequities that in turn creates in terms of, the poorest state spending the most, how can we impact that and change that? Well, the simple thing that we can do individually, and this ties into food and health because the two are linked, interchange and tightly linked. Eat less meat. Meat it's inefficient to produce. I mean, the amount of farmland, the amount of nutrients, all those things that have to go into producing 1 pound of meat. It's not an efficient way of nourishing ourselves. And yet here we are, Louisiana with an abundance of agriculture in a land that's bountiful and plentiful, eating more fruits and vegetables. What are they? They're rich in antioxidants. They are higher in fiber. So the antioxidants, this is the most important part of atherosclerosis, which leads to heart disease and stroke, is the oxidized particles that get deposited that build up the plaques that cause heart attacks and strokes, which in turn, we have to do the bypass surgeries and stents and all of the things that go along, the rehabilitation cost after a stroke. These are, things that contribute to those medical expenditures. Improving fiber, it reduces cancer. It also reduces, eating more fruits and vegetables, less caloric density. It reduces obesity. We're the most obese state in the country. And so as the complications of obesity, yes, cancer is higher. More infections are higher. We had lots of expensive hospitalizations related to COVID in populations that were plagued by obesity and diabetes. And then osteoarthritis and degenerative joint disease, which leads to the inability to walk. And the need to walk more and exercise more, which not only has beneficial impacts on health, but if we can improve our ability to do walkability, we can reduce the need for gasoline and the contribution that makes to the atmosphere. And so, if there's ever a state that can figure out how to get creative, I mean, the diversity of the multicultural influences we have in this state, this is the state that, gumbo and jambalaya from our African roots, the Spanish influence of, paella and the jambalaya there, the ability, the French influence of cooking, the ability to get creative and cook things that are fantastic and wonderful, but doing it using more fruits and vegetables. If there's a state and country that can figure out how to do it, it's got to be us.
It's got to be us. It's got to be us. I love it. I love it. I love that the answer to the question of health was we could cook better. You know what I'm saying, Louisiana? I think we can achieve that. And I also find it so interesting. Here we are hearing from Margie that we should be treating farmers who grow food the same way we treat commodity farmers, and how that really fits into that health question. We're hearing from Jessica that people should have access to clean water. And these water systems have to be available and accessible. And we're hearing from Anjanika, everyone has to have just somewhere to be, a safe and affordable place to be. These are basic concepts in our community that are absolutely impacted by a new climate reality. What does all of this mean in the midst of disaster? What does all of this mean with higher heats where the crops can't grow, as we heard from Chief in central Louisiana? What happens when you treat the farmers well and the food can't grow because the heat is too high? We're connecting some dots here because these things are connected. And one dot I want to connect for our next speaker is the amount of money we pay on healthcare for the poor state reminds me of what I heard about an energy burden and the amount of money people pay of their income for their energy bill. And let's take this conversation over to energy and hear from Logan Burke, who will talk to us a little bit about Logan, tell us about the Alliance for Affordable Energy, what y'all do, and then tell us something that's right there. It's right in front of us. It could help us advance equity and address this climate crisis. Over to you.
Absolutely. I'm Logan Burke. I'm the Executive Director for the Alliance for Affordable Energy. We are a consumer and environmental advocacy organization working for you, all of you, all of us across the state of Louisiana. And generally what that means is we get in there and advocate for things like access to solar and more clean energy, more energy efficiency, making sure that residents aren't paying more than their fair share. But the fact of the matter is that the solution, the one that we can all benefit from, but really the equitable solution, it's energy efficiency. And that is partly because it is both one of these, it gets at the mitigation of emissions and the adaptation to the century that we live in now. Already, Louisianans use the most electricity in the country per capita. The average Louisiana household uses about 30% more electricity than the average American household. That's a lot of extra electricity. And it's not just because it's hot. There are lots of other states that are hot. Our problem is a real housing stock issue. And that is largely because we haven't ever had long-standing proper energy efficiency programs. And never has it been more important that our homes are efficient, not just in terms of reducing our electricity burdens and our emissions, but also for health. When we think of the warming climate, we know that we've got time baked in here where it is going to get warmer, but it's also going to get more humid. Our heat islands are continuing to get worse. New Orleans, for example, has one of the worst heat island effects in the country. We know also that we're experiencing more of these cold snaps where it's much colder than our houses are ready to winter. And so this comes down to real health and safety questions. And furthermore, why are we wasting all of that electricity? We don't have to, because we can be investing in energy efficiency. And energy efficiency is not just a light bulb. Obviously, a light bulb is the visible, more visible way of reducing our light bill. But our energy bill, our electricity bill, is so connected to how we use electricity to heat and cool our homes and water. That's really where it's at. And so if we can really get into how do we make our home, and I'm looping back to what Andronika was talking about, how do we make sure that everyone in Louisiana has safe, healthy housing, has a place to lay their head, that they know they can breathe when it's hot and humid outside, that they know they can be comfortable when it's cold outside on Mardi Gras night, even if the power goes out, not that it should. The point I'm trying to make here is that as much as we need to invest, obviously, in things like solar and wind and all of these other things that are going to be huge economic drivers for our state, the first thing we have to do, I like to say, we need to eat our energy efficiency vegetables before we get our solar cookies. Otherwise, we're just wasting all that electricity. This is really important because it's the first line. You know, the energy system for 120 years was about how do we generate electricity and how do we get it to people? And what I'm saying is that from the 21st century, we need to start at home. We have to start from how people use energy and how we keep people safe and healthy. And the first best defense is an energy efficiency home. I'm going to stop there.
I love it. I was still laughing about solar cookies. And so thank you. So thank you for that, Logan. And also thank you for bringing it back. I mean, what just happened was these conversations, these topics, these things that we've been trained and told to talk about as one particular issue are actually part of a circle. These are dots that have to be connected. And this is an intersectional analysis that we have to use as we're preparing for this climate crisis. I'm going to ask all of our panelists to be ready to come back in, and I'm going to make some space. I believe we've been joined by Lenore Curall of the United Homa Nation, who will give us a little bit of feedback. Lenore, we are very aware that folks are in recovery mode. We've heard from Chief Sherelle Parfait Dardar and from Chief Troy Carey in Northern Louisiana. So we know that folks are struggling right now. And we just thank you for your time and ability to join us. We'd love to hear just a little bit about the Homa Nation and how climate is impacting the tribe. And then Mr. Robert Taylor will come over to you to hear a little bit about John the Baptist Parish and how some of this energy conversation connects to the climate conversation and impacts communities there. Let me turn it over to you, Lenore. If you're able to join us, we can see your.
Thank you, Colette. Yes.
Come on in.
I appreciate it. I send my regards, the regards on behalf of Chief Carpel. He is working this evening and was not able to join. I think for those of you guys that are not aware, he's a fireman and has worked, oh gosh, close to 30 years as a fireman for Gretna Fire Department. In the city of Gretna, and I think since 2 days before the storm, he's had 3 days off and working 24-hour shifts. So he's, and on those 3 days, he's out in the community doing work and continuing to do what he can between there. And so, I give you his regards. It's it's a challenging time for our communities. We are a total population of 19,000 plus tribal citizens, with 75% of those individuals living in 6 parishes along Southeast Louisiana. We have estimated, based on Ida's landfall in the areas with the most significant impacts, that we have about 11,000 tribal members that have direct impacts and that would have seen the most significant winds and flooding. At this point in time, we're approaching week 5 post landfall, and we still have areas in certain communities that don't have electricity. And that's concerning. I think that is probably by far a record for sure of just the length of time of people being without the basics of what they need. We are dealing with situations of folks living on the ground in some pretty horrendous conditions, tents, living in their vehicles, families banding together and choosing who's got the better home and in the best condition, and living pretty much 3 or 4 families in a house, or finding a place where they may have a trailer, or I know a family living, 2 families that are living in a shed, and so they're making do. I was quite disheartened with someone from on Monday, and that their earliest projections of any kind of temporary housing on the ground, because we know right now what's in place for folks is the hotel option, and a lot of people are not going to leave. They're not going to leave their property. They're working. They're trying to get things in order as quickly as they can, or they can't leave for work. And local hotels are either not in any shape to house them, or they were already filled with folks from federal agencies, contractors, those kinds of things. So what's available is you've got to travel a distance out of the area. And so that's not, I would say, a very fair option for a lot of folks. And so the discussion is realistically, they anticipate the first potential options being on the ground November 1st.
Okay.
And
that would be like trailers, like FEMA trailers, or things like
which is just not acceptable. The other thing that was very disheartening was that the discussion of that process of who ultimately will determine where that may be and in what areas those will be allowed to be, or going to be discussions with the state and parish. For instance, my concern in Terrebonne Parish is as soon as Terrebonne Parish, the city of Houma, was back functional, electricity and all of their utilities in place, they disbanded their OEP office and kind of were back to business as usual, sent everybody back into their normal jobs and those kinds of things, while the lower bayou areas were continually struggling. And so my concern lies is are those the folks going to be making those decisions and sitting at the table, and how much are they going to fight for our people, for their needs? So we're doing our best to advocate and being able to speak up on behalf of our citizens and folks in the lower lying areas that they have needs that need to be addressed. We're very concerned about tribal elders. We have a large number of tribal elders that their homes were just destroyed. And they're at an age, health, and income wise that it's going to be really difficult to start all over. And so we're, contemplating and trying to figure out and brainstorm how can we create some kind of senior living options for them that still allows them to have independence. That's so much a part of their lives. So those are the things that for me kind of weigh heavily. The other conversations I think we need to be thinking about is, as things continue to roll out, is we are going to need to be steadfast in making sure our fishermen, particularly our smaller fishermen, that there's an advocate for them, and someone that's looking out for, like the discussion about the smaller farmers. The smaller fishermen are gonna be left out of this, and how are they gonna be accommodated? We're trying to have some conversations, and I think there's just misunderstanding. Some of the discussions are as well, we can maybe help them with meeting their insurance claims, and it was like, no, you don't understand, small fishermen can't afford insurance.
Right.
And so their loss is going to be significant, and they're probably going to fall between the cracks of a lot of some of the other programs.
Yeah, this is really important. I'm just butting in here, Lenore, just because I think there's something here, right? When these climate disasters hit, there are people who are hurt worse than others. There are those who are going to have a more difficult time recovering if you don't have money before the storm to get insurance, to maintain these things. And after the climate disaster, these things get worse. I want to just point this out because the broader conversation around how this climate crisis is impacting Louisiana is really important for us to hear the real stories of impact, which we've been hearing all evening. And I want to thank you, Lenore, and the Houma Nation for adding your voices into the conversation today. And I want to shift from those bayou areas that some still don't have electricity 5 weeks later, y'all. That's what just got said. And think about what it is our industries are actually being advanced to do, right? It's the energy systems that these industries are much of them are fueling into. And in times of climate disaster, we don't even have access to that. It's not good enough. We're not there yet. But these industries are having other impacts as well, and they're connected to other stories. And I want to ask Mr. Robert Taylor to come in and offer some comments from another longstanding community in St. John the Baptist Parish, I believe. And we want to hear a little bit about, Mr. Robert, where you are, what your community is like, and what are some of the impacts that you're seeing, specifically anything you want to talk to us about with the health of your community and how all of that connects.
Okay, thanks a lot for this opportunity. The people in St. John the Baptist Parish have been devastated by the storm. I don't think any community has suffered as extensive level of damage as the communities in LaPlace and Reserve and Garyville. Primarily LaPlace, which is adjacent to the lake. And the meaning of that storm surge that everybody knew was coming in is that it flooded these communities, these 80, 90% Black communities. These families had 7, 8 feet of water in their homes, in the streets of those communities. If you go there now, you will think it's a war zone. I mean, thousands of homes, thousands. As you go block to block for miles in those communities, every home there, it was a surge. That storm pushed the lake directly over into those communities. And these people they are going through psychological trauma now that I think we're going to suffer a long time the effects of that. I had one family who grew up more in my community. They ran upstairs to hide from the 7 feet of water in their home. And by the time they were going to sleep that night, but they were awakened by a noise. Her husband opened the bedroom door to go down, and the house was afire. Their house caught fire doing this. Now they're trapped upstairs with 7 feet of water trying to get down the stairway and with the house burning around. Miraculously, these people survived. They had no help, zero help from the local government. These people were crying out to Homeland Safety, to the Sheriff Department. They were informed that it was too dangerous for their people to come out to help them. I live a few miles further upriver, closer to the river. The people in Reserve were not threatened by the waters from the lake. We only suffered from the winds of the storm. As in my case, my complete roof was yanked off the house. Therefore, all of the rainwater, I was flooded from the top, not from the bottom, which is a more thorough form of flooding. Because as in Sharon's case, Sharon Levine in St. James, her roof leaked. And that's what caused the destruction of our entire house. We have had such a serious lack of coordination of everything in our parish that they started to evacuate people after the storm. No mandatory evacuation. I mean, my children made sure, because that's the way I raised them, we do not stay in that storm. We take refuge so that we can come back and pick up the pieces, but we will be there, the people. These people were not given a mandatory evacuation order. They obviously were not prepared. And so what we find there now is, after having suffered the pandemic with our little parish there on the river, having the distinction of having the highest death rate from coronavirus in the entire United States, which is, as an advocate, environmental advocate, we had been preaching that to the people, that as a result of our exposure, EPA's researchers told us that we were compromised. We had the highest cancer risk in the United States as a result.
Exposure to what, Mr. Robert? As a result of exposure to what?
Chloroprene from DuPont Danker. That is what EPA informed us of. that we suffer 1,500 times the national. That is unreal. To say that not one governmental, only one then, and he's been kicked out of office because he supported the people. Not other than him, not one governmental official supported the people in their struggle with DuPont Danker, even after EPA gave them all of this information. It took the pandemic to come along and prove it all right.
So let me connect some dots here. So I'm hearing the DuPont Danker, the industrial plant, has chemicals that are in the air. The residents around the chemical plant, mostly Black, as you were telling us about this parish, are exposed to this, and their immune system and their respiratory system is compromised. And then when COVID came, the death rate is so high because of the health being compromised because of exposure to these chemicals. Is that how to follow that?
Exactly. You put it perfectly. You know, our cancer rate itself is very high. And I would imagine, since we had a 1,500, our risk was 1,500. Can you imagine what the actual cancer rate was going to turn out to be? I mean, if the risk nationally, which EPA shared with us, was 0.9 is the national average, we were 1,500. 50, that is unimaginable. I can't imagine any society that would tolerate that sort of atrocity to be perpetrated, perpetuated, and for the longest it's been going on. But just to commit such a vile act and allow that today still, I started this organization in 2016 and we began this fight. We found out all this information. EPA had this information when I started, when the poor people in St. John Parish joined with me and we started this advocacy. They began to give us the information. Nothing has been done to ameliorate that yet. We had an elementary school 1,500 feet from the fence line that had from 400 to 700 times the exposure rate that is recommended by EPA. They are still there today. Danker has not or has not budged an ounce, and Region 6 or whoever is responsible, mostly Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality, who came to St. John because of our advocacy, and the director of that organization, appointed by our governor, attacked me. He attacked the concerned citizens. He told the people of St. John Parish over their council meeting video that went to the parish that I was the problem, not DuPont Danker. Mr. Chuck Carl Brown, I think that is that ought to be a felony crime. The people
thank you.
Are suffering now because these people are in place to protect us. I just said that to show the example. Right. That DEQ is there to protect us from Danker. So Mr. Brown come to our community and tells the people in the community that I am the problem. That we are.
So let's open this up, because I think you've brought us, and I want to thank you, Mr. Robert. I think you've brought us to back to where we started from, which is, you know, this is a climate task force initiated by the governor of the great state of Louisiana. And this task force is charged with making sure that we are putting forth not just recommendations, but actions, things that need to change in order for us to get to some solution. And I want to thank you for talking to us about what is happening in St. John the Baptist. I want to thank Lenore Curall for talking to us what is happening with tribal citizens across these 6 southern parishes. We're seeing a lot of movement, and I want to ask all of our panelists to come back in now as we continue to hear from folks like Mr. Robert and Lenore to really start hearing questions from the public, from the comments from the public. And what we're going to do is I'm going to ask the comments come in, and I'm going to ask Kendall for some direction on how we're going to take comments from folks who want to come off of their mute. And also just want to ask folks to remember we're going to go into a space now where we need a lot of room for everyone, okay? So while we want to hear, we've gotten to ground ourselves in some community leaders, some experiences that we're able to really get some understanding around. And now we want you to tell us what's important to you, what's really sticking out for you in this conversation as we get ready for the final recommendations to go toward action around climate. We want to hear from folks in their comments. What is really sticking out for you? What's an issue? Let's say water, health, housing, food, energy. What's sticking out for you? And what's some personal experiences that you have to connect to that? We're going to encourage the panelists to respond to the questions that come in. I'll do a little moderating here. And I also want to invite the Equity Advisory Group members to now bring some questions both to the greater public, but also to these experts as well. So Kendall, let me hear any instructions around folks coming in. Are we just making a list?
Yeah, if you want to get on the stack, put name in the chat. Okay. We'll get to you. I just keeping those prompts in mind.
Okay, great. So let me go to any Equity Advisory Group members before we open up just to the general public. We've got a few members still on the call. Any questions or experiences that you want to bring into the table? Anything you want to hone in on around water, energy, housing, food, health? Let's see if there's anyone who wants to come off. I see Chief Sherrell's hand. And Charles, were you trying to come in as well? Okay, that's okay. I just wanted to make sure. Okay, so Chief Sherrell, over to you. You can unmute and we'll take your point.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So of course, in our experience, especially now with Hurricane Ida, and this is something that our community and our tribes have been working on ahead of this, right? Because we need to be proactive rather than reactive. We have science, we have traditional ecological knowledge. Those two work beautifully together. And we need to utilize that, right? And it's in our diversity that we're going to come up with these solutions to these challenges that we're facing now. So one of the things that we have been speaking about even more now is the need for resilient housing, self-sustainable housing, right? Especially for communities that are considered on the front lines. We need to build, of course, we're going to have to rebuild, but we have to rebuild better and with respect and love for our environment and understanding of where we are. We know that communities have been building hurricane resistant housing. Of course, I did go and do a little research on that and the price really scared me. So we need to find ways to do those things affordably, right? And that's going to benefit this state in the long run. Okay, while we understand that not every single home is going to be considered hurricane proof, so to speak, it's an opportunity for us to be proactive in a way that we can prevent an entire community from being devastated. We also need to invest in more solar options, solar energy, right? Because
let's go there, Chief. Let's go there. Let's pull in Andronika and Logan Burke on housing and more solar, the point you were just making here, and then we'll move over to Steve and Charles, who are also in the queue. No disrespect, Chief, just want to make sure folks are coming in, and want to invite other folks with questions to prepare. We're going to ask our experts here to chime in. Andronika, affordable housing, Chief was very clear about it. Affordable housing, climate resilient housing. Can you offer, what does housing have to do with climate change? Like how are those things, really connected together? Because some folks will move right past it. Why are we talking about reducing emissions and housing? What does this have to do with the other? Can you help us connect some dots here? And then Logan, same for you. Solar, is that the end all be all to everything? We do need more of it. Sounds like folks are still out of power. What's the connection to this energy and the climate crisis? Andronika, let me let you speak to that.
So we talked about it a little bit earlier, Colette, and and Chief Sherrill just made the point, and she and the other speakers tonight have made the point beautifully. Number one, we are not going to get the kind of engagement around climate change, getting people to focus on it and fighting for it when they are in crisis in their everyday lives. Housing is one of the base needs that have to be met every day. It is a foundational issue. You cannot learn if you are housing insecure. You cannot recover from illness. It's going to be hard to keep a job if you are too far away from your employers, and on and on. It's a foundational issue. And it's also foundational for climate change because it's one of the ways that people can individually contribute to it by reducing the emissions in their own home. And it's a bigger bang for your buck. You can do that by embracing energy efficiency that Logan talked about, making your home more hurricane resistant, and also making sure that we are trying to stop these climate intensified storms from continuing to ramp up. This is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Our energy rates are so-called cheap, but our houses are highly inefficient. We live in, we have harsher and wilder swings, right? That we are having we had the hottest July on record, and in the same year where we had the polar vortex in the deep south. That this isn't going away. Climate change is real, and the emissions that residential units contribute to it is also very real, and people are living with the very real consequences of this. And so we can kill a lot of birds with those
Let's
by
not kill
letting
any
people.
birds. Listen, we're not killing any birds on the environmental.
Oh, I forgot. It was particularly problematic. Anybody watched Trevor Noah last night, and he talked about there was I think 23 species that were officially classified as extinct. So sorry, I didn't mean to kill any birds, metaphorically or not.
It's all
But
good. I think we get to kill them if we put them in the gumbo. But other than that, there's no killing of the birds. That's still
no
allowed.
more meat. Dr. Kenny said, "Stop eating all that meat."
Dr. Kenny said, "Okay, that's right. That's right." Well, thank you, Andronika, and thank you for connecting those dots. Logan, Andronika brings in where Chief Sherrill was going, that energy piece to housing. But I think Chief Sherrill was also saying something much broader, right? There's housing, but then there's solar and renewable energy more broadly. Can you speak to that? And then we'll go to a few other questions.
Sure. Well, the first thing that I want to say is that while Andronika and I are really talking so much about kind of solutions where people are, I want to be very clear that by saying that, it's not saying it's all up to individuals to solve this. Right? We have to remember that the vast majority of our emissions are coming from our industrial facilities. But what we're talking about here from an equity position, how do we make this tenable to people who have been harmed and targeted by those very same industries that are causing our climate crisis, right? So when we think about solar, it's why it's so important to me to see that residents and communities have the opportunity to own that stuff, to put it on their homes alongside battery power. First of all, we know that rather than the generator that you go buy and you fill with more fossil fuel after a major storm, the solar and distributed batteries, they work all year. Just like energy efficiency, it's not just something that you got to haul out of the garage. Second, you don't have to worry about so many of the deaths that we're dealing with in these most recent years of these storms is coming from people dying in their homes and being poisoned from carbon monoxide, and not just from those little portable generators. Even the large inline built-in gas-fired generators are harming people in their homes. And so this is why it's in addition to reducing the overall costs of the energy grid, putting power into the hands of people is an equity question, right? And allowing communities to own it together, to build community wealth, rather than just simply saying, how do we hand more money to investor-owned utilities? That's my position. How do we find a way to build wealth within these communities rather than saying, let's build just large solar farms? Yes, we need those too, but how can we do this in a way that benefits everyone? And so that's why I think if we talk more about distributed solar and batteries, that needs to be not just on our homes, it needs to be in our community centers, places where people automatically go for community support, whether it's our churches, our rec centers, the kinds of places that automatically become the distribution centers after these storms.
That's right.
This is about all of those pieces together.
Yeah, I was just thinking about distribution center that the Houma tribe has, and it just is where people are going to get their information, to get their donations. It becomes the center. What if these central places in our communities were powered by not just renewable energy, solar, but controlled their own energy? And thinking back to Dr. Kenneth's comment about, all the money we spend on health systems, but we're a relatively poor state. I mean, putting some of these resources and wealth back into the hands of these poor people feels like a way we should be approaching this. Thank you so much, Logan. Thank you so much, Andronika. Let's keep going. We've got a few of our Equity Advisory Group members with some questions. Charles, will come to you, and then Steve will go to you after that. Charles, please go ahead.
Thank you, Colette, and thank you to our panel and all of our guests this evening. Logan, your comments take me back to how a few years ago, you and I were involved in those conversations around investments in microgrids. Remember that concept? Where basically, as you nicely and eloquently put it, investments are made at the governmental sector, business sector, but then also, as you said, how do we get that power in the hands of individual people and communities? So that when the grid goes down, we're not all down for weeks on end and months, it appears to some communities. There's got to be a better way of doing this. So we got to get back to that concept. I don't know if you know, Logan, what the latest might be in terms of those conversations we were involved in, if there's any movement on that, but that microgrids concept has got to be advanced. What we learned from Hurricane Katrina in terms of being a disaster as it relates to the gray and green infrastructure, and then we made, of course, huge investments in that. We've got to now learn that important lesson from Ida. Ida was such a failure of the electrical grid. In the third decade of the third millennium, we got to do better than this.
Thank you for that, Charles. Logan, I'm wondering if you could speak to microgrids, where we are on that, and speaking about just the grid failure in Ida. And Jessica, I'd like to also pull you in on the grid failure in Ida and what that meant for the water systems, and then we'll move over to Steve. So Logan, over to you.
Yeah, just really briefly, Charles is referring to some really great work that was done by one of our national labs, Sandia National Lab, that worked with the city of New Orleans to figure out what would be the best and easiest places to install microgrids in the city so that there could be, I hate using the word resilient for people, but for systems, it makes sense. Resilient systems for after these events, right? And frankly, just to make our grid harder on a sunny day, we need that in this state, right? So far what's happened is it's that those reports have sat on a shelf. And unfortunately, it has seemed that the local utilities haven't been willing to pick up that ball and move with it. And unfortunately, that ball is in their hands. There's been a lot of conversation about how Entergy had said they could island the city if they got this gas plant. Well, in order to do that, they would have to have actually developed a microgrid. Turns out they didn't. Secret's out. So what we're seeing here is the utilities continue to do the same old thing, and we keep living in the same nightmare. And there are solutions here, and we just have to take those plans off the shelf and actually put them into action. And that's not just going to require state investment, that's going to require federal investment. And it should come out of things like the infrastructure bill, it should come out of things like the reconciliation bill, but oh, by the way, it should be part of these disaster relief packages. We should be building back better, not just slapping it all together the way it always was.
Thank you for that, Logan. And I'm really hearing that we've got ideas, we've got solutions, we've got lots of things already ready, but not the political will, not the financial investment from our leadership. And so thank you for bringing that up and really bringing up that whole cities have even thought of solutions. I'm curious, Jessica, I learned from you about water pumps and water systems and that even they rely on electricity. Can you talk to us a little bit about what happened, especially in Ida, but I guess in a more general sense of what does electricity efficiency have to do with water, and how does that come together?
Yeah, well, water and energy are two peas in a pod, as me and Logan always say. You cannot run your water systems without electricity, and not just talking about our drainage system. I failed to mention there's a lot of water facts that I could probably spend a lot of time on, but New Orleans in particular has the most inequitable water utility in the nation. People pay between 12% and 17% of their income to water alone. And then we're not even talking about Entergy itself. So this is why Louisiana is so poor, because we're spending so much money on our utilities. The reason why water is so expensive is because we have to power every aspect of it in order for it to run. So whether we're talking about New Orleans or St. James Parish or LaPlace or even coastal communities, it requires power to clean your water. And because most of us are drinking water from the Mississippi River, it requires even more energy to clean and make that water potable. The other thing is obviously wastewater treatment and sewerage costs money to process, which goes into Lake Pontchartrain or also the Mississippi River. And then additionally, the main thing is drainage. So a lot of people across Louisiana, even in LaPlace, which was an amazing conversation, but that conversation is like, just put some drains in, just put some pumps in. That's the answer. But in fact, it is not the answer. And it's a part of the equation, but shouldn't be 100% of the equation. It should be 20% of the equation. When we depend on drains, we sink. So if you're worried about putting more drains in, then your community, which is already low lying, is going to drop 4, 5, 6 feet and double the time it would have happened normally in a normal ecological system. The other thing is that your bills will get higher, increasing inequity and increasing the ability or the lack of the ability to pay for their water bills. And so when we depend on oil and gas for water systems, we are really doubling down on climate inequity and environmental justice issues, because then our air quality is ruined. We aren't paying for it. And so when we're looking at the situation in Southeast Louisiana, we have some of the oldest infrastructure in the country, and it is not working, and it is more expensive to fix it. And so we really have to move away from that, because we can keep dropping $70 million into pumps and into drainage systems that aren't working, instead of putting it into ways that we know that historically worked before there was gray infrastructure. So again, I'm just going to double down and say those two things are inexplicably connected. And then when we put in more money into our failing energy grid, we're also putting more money into our failing water systems and flood reduction systems.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for that and making that connection. And I'm also surprised to hear, most people think, if you put that great infrastructure in, it's helping. but I learned from friends that the levee system also drops the land. It sounds like you're saying the drainage system drops the land. This great infrastructure is actually accelerating some of the problem that residents are feeling. In addition, the sea levels are rising and the storms are getting stronger. We've got to start putting some of this stuff together to make sure that the solutions work for the people. Steve Cochran, a member of our Equity Advisory Group. Steve, you want to pose a question, and then we'll open it up to others in the meeting.
Yeah, I actually put it in the chat because I know it's going to let everybody talk. But I really, I kind of want to get from at least a couple of panelists, what are the 2 or 3 policy changes that we ought to be focused on, and who can make them? I mean, the task force gets to make recommendations. That's our responsibility. And we ought to really center that. And so I just thought we could ask a couple of the panels and just to give their ideas about that.
Well, I know I was talking to Margie the other day, and she started talking policy to me. I had to pick up my book. Margie, I'm curious if you've got some policy shifts that can happen. And also, Dr. Kenny Cole, I'm curious around health. You know, health and climate are so tied as we're listening to Mr. Robert and to so many of these other folks who are around these chemical plants. You know, what are some policy changes we could be thinking about? Margie, let me turn it over to you, and Dr. Cole, we'll go to you after that.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that we really push for a lot is parity in subsidies, right? So what that means is that we're subsidizing food in the same way that we're subsidizing the production of commodity crops. And it's, you know, it's a solution that's been being proposed for a really long time. A lot of people have pushed for it. The only reason we're not doing it is that we're not doing it, right? So that I think would be a huge step in the right direction, and then incentivizing carbon farming in a way that's not then selling those carbon credits to polluters, right? So actually capturing carbon and making sure it stays in the soil and paying farmers to do that work because it's part of our collective survival. The other policy change I would push for that brings in equity in agriculture is that there are workforce development programs in a lot of states where that labor is subsidized for new and beginning farmers to learn on farms. It's really important that you get like actual experience on a farm before you make the life-changing decision of dedicating your entire world to agriculture. People don't have that space because farmers don't make enough money to pay living wages. If the state can come in and help subsidize those living wage jobs, people can really start to reckon with whether or not that's what they want to dedicate their life or maybe their family land to in a way that they don't have space to do, because frankly, the only people who have time to quit their jobs and work for free on a farm are generally going to be young, wealthy, white people. And that's why we see those sustainable agriculture jobs often be folks who fit that demographic. So we need to make agricultural jobs equitable, and we need to do that by infusing some money via policy into labor. And those are my answers. Thanks so much.
I love that, Margie. Let me ask just one clarifying question. You said a word that has popped up in the task force for the last few months, which was sequestration, carbon sequestration. And I'm curious, as Lindsay mentioned earlier, there will be, and everyone is invited to the industrial decarbonization meetings that will be happening in the next couple of weeks, and we'll be learning from other experts around technologies and what's available. But Margie, what does farming have to do with carbon sequestration? Is there some soil natural way of doing this thing, or I thought it was all technology?
Thank you for that question. The soil is our greatest carbon sink, right? When you are growing plants, you're actually capturing carbon from the air, locking it into the soil as long as that plant material is turned back into the earth. So it increases the organic matter in our fields, the productivity of our fields, saves money on fertilizer, reduces the runoff of synthetic fertilizer, and reduces that original pollution that it happens at fertilizer factories. But yeah, we can actually trap all of the carbon in the air, in the soil. It's the best technology, also the oldest technology.
Yeah, this brings me back to Chief Sherrell's point, right? There's this traditional knowledge that we should be investing in. And she also said we can't forget about those small fishermen, and the small fishermen are feeling the impacts of the dead zone, which is that runoff into the river. So just thank you for helping us learn that. Dr. Cole, I want to go back to Steve's question, policy recommendations on health. Where could we do, what could we be advancing and pushing to get to some solutions?
Well, first, I mean, health is more than just the absence of infirmity or disease. Health is really about a complete state of mental, social, and physical well-being. And yet, we have a healthcare system that has traditionally been very reactive to disease once that disease has been entrenched, right? Rather than proactive prevention. And so policies that will continue to facilitate the transformation of healthcare away from volume-driven, transaction-based financing approaches, where healthcare is financed by paying for every visit, blood test, X-ray, so forth, rather than paying more of a population-based payment, where it's like, here's the money, keep people healthy. What are you going to invest in to keep people healthy? You probably have less cath labs and freestanding emergency departments, and you would have more social workers and dietitians and health coaches and investment in new ways of delivering care that focus on how do we really impact the true drivers of health outcomes, because clinical care is only 20% of the drivers of health outcomes. 40% is the social determinants of health, 30% is health behaviors. And health behaviors are typically a function of things like adverse childhood traumatic experiences, things that have impacted mental health, that have resulted in maladaptive coping mechanisms. So that's the 70% that's driving health outcomes, policies that will continue to facilitate that transformation, which is underway but incomplete.
Let me hone in a little bit on this. You just amazed me with those percentages, that the social determinants are 40% of whether or not we're healthy. When I think about what Mr. Robert was just saying, what Sharon Levine has been known globally for her advocacy around, what we're hearing about folks who live next to these industries, to hear that 40% of your health is really about what you're living around and what's around you. It sounds like there should be some policies that address that problem. Is there anything in the health community that's connecting what's around people's houses and the desire that we want for Louisianians to live longer and healthier lives?
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly there need to be policies that will also impact the physical environment and the substances, the chemicals, the things that also have an impact on our health. That is far less my own area of expertise, but agree that it's important.
All right, I'll take it. Thank you. I'm taking notes and I'm writing things down, and I'm starting to learn and connect some of the dots. I hope that many of you are doing the same. And we are at 8 o'clock. I know this has been a very fast 2 hours for me, but not an unnoticeable one, because I'm hungry and I am sure that many of you are too. Don't forget, Dr. Kenny told us we need to eat better, fruits and vegetables for dinner for everyone tonight. I'm going to ask that we put the comment link back into the chat so that folks understand, and I'll ask Kendall to say it out loud again, ask folks to submit any further formal comments through the link that'll be shared in the chat, climate@la.gov. What we know we can do is receive those comments via email and read them into the record. This is my loving apology. We did have a 3-hour meeting, and I was convinced that nobody really wanted to do 3 hours all night long. But we want your comments submitted in so that we can make them part of the formal record. We did want to take some time to allow people to just give their voices, y'all. Not everybody can sit down at a computer and send comments. We wanted to make some space today to hear from folks that we don't usually hear from. I want to also just thank our experts, panelists today, Andronika, Jessica, Logan, Dr. Kenny, Margie, really want to say thank you. Also want to offer our deep love and gratitude to Chief Sherelle, to the other Indigenous leaders who were on the phone, Lenore Curall, who was here on behalf of Chief Capel of the Houma Nation. And also we had Chief Troy Carey coming in from the Appalachia. We really want to appreciate the voices here, as well as some of the historic communities that we heard from, Sharon Levine, Robert Taylor, Miss Myrtle. We want to thank y'all for your voices. Thank you, everyone. This is not done in vain. This is done because the Equity Advisory Group wants to hear from everyone around how we make our recommendations to the governor's office. So your comments, the stories that we heard today will be considered as we go forward. Our next step, as Lindsay went over with everyone, is to make sure that we are submitting our comments into the governor's office around the actions that are necessary and how we advance equity. It's because of your testimony today, your comments today, that we'll be able to represent the people of Louisiana a lot better when we're sending these pieces in. There's a lot more. Lindsay showed you we're not done with this process. This goes all the way into 2022. We want to encourage you to stay engaged, not just in these meetings, but in many others. I'll ask for Kendall to put the website into the chat so folks can check out their past recordings. There's information, some documents that Lindsay went over from the governor's office today that you can take a look through. And please take your time and get involved in this Climate Initiatives Task Force. With that, let me just check in with Lindsay to see if there's anything else before we close out.
Yes, Chair, do you want us to read the comments received so far into the record?
Let's see, how many people will kill me if we keep going past dinner time?
We just have 2 comments.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and read those in, and then if we receive any more, can we read them in at a later time and make sure they become part of the record?
Yes, absolutely. And I will just say that our email, climate@la.gov, is always open, always here to receive feedback, especially right now. And I'll just reiterate, as I said earlier, we are in the midst of 2 public comment periods on the draft portfolio that we released, and also on the draft context called the draft partial final report. Both of those are out for comment now through October 8th. So please do provide us comments on those documents so that we can include all these great perspectives in that. So I'll start with the first comment I received from Allison Ruttenberg from Healthy Gulf. And her letter reads, "Dear members of the Equity Advisory Group, we commend the task force for calling an Equity Advisory Group meeting in order to prioritize the voices of folks living on the front lines of climate change. History has shown us that excluding people, particularly frontline and Indigenous communities, from state level decision making benefits industries at the expense of human health and environment. We fully support the Equity Advisory Group September 30th meeting as a step towards centering Indigenous and frontline perspectives to advance just climate initiatives and an equitable hurricane recovery process. Reversing the cycle of sacrificing communities for industrial profit necessitates a democratic system that is accessible to all, especially those most impacted by climate change. Tribal and historical communities in Louisiana feel firsthand the impacts of oil and gas development. Indigenous tribes are losing physical land and being displaced and relocated due to sea level rise and coastal land loss. Louisiana cannot achieve a sustainable future unless Indigenous communities are at the forefront of the planning and implementation process. What's more, the task force must acknowledge the historic and continued violences inflicted on Indigenous people in order to move forward from the pattern of injustice. A just climate transition must recognize all Indigenous tribes of the Gulf South as sovereign nations and follow local and Indigenous leadership regarding decisions that affect their communities and sovereign territory. So we oppose false solutions such as carbon storage, ocean fertilization, biofuel, and carbon sinks. Rather than addressing the root cause of climate change, false solutions manipulate natural systems that harm human health and further destabilize our climate. These initiatives are rooted in extractive economic philosophy to continue a pattern of sacrificing communities. The best way to keep Louisiana healthy is to strengthen our democratic system, beginning with the task force. By increasing public participation in the climate task force, we can avoid initiatives that abuse human rights and bring forth solutions that benefit the health and the wealth of all communities. So we applaud the Equity Advisory Group to hold this meeting to understand the impacts of Hurricane Ida across our energy, water, agriculture, housing, and public health sectors. We support hearing from advocates leading the movement for clean air, clean water, healthy food, and renewable energy systems as we plan equitable climate disaster recovery. But at the same time, frontline communities are currently experiencing a double disaster. Our communities in the coastal and river parishes that bore the brunt of Hurricane Ida are exposed to oil spills, chemical fires and releases, industrial flooding from the very same storm. So there's a need to address how the oil and gas industry not only contributes to our intensifying climate disasters, but exacerbates the damage. While we fully support the Equity Advisory Group meeting that centers on Indigenous and frontline voices, we acknowledge that this must be one step of many to ensure equitable climate transition. Just democracy in the climate task force means participation of Indigenous people, communities of color, rural communities, farmer, fisher folk, low-income communities, and migrant workers. So we demand the Governor's Office of Coastal Affairs take steps to increase public awareness and participation, including broadcasting task force meetings and public comment information on radio stations, news network, billboards, prioritizing task force meetings that center frontline Indigenous perspectives, and creating an option to remotely call in public comments. Strengthening access, rights of information, and public participation deepens our understanding of the climate crisis and solutions that promote prosperity. We hope that this meeting opens the door for people-centered vision in the task force so that we can build a just and sustainable future for all Louisianans. And this letter was signed by 15 local organizations, Viola New Orleans, No Waste Louisiana, Power Coalition, Sprout NOLA, Common Ground Relief, Louisiana League of Conscious Voters, Coalition Against Death Valley, Liberty Restoration, CDC, Ashe Cultural Arts Center, Resilience is Power Program, 350 New Orleans, Healthy Gulf, Pax Christian, Louisiana for a Green New Deal, and Alliance for Affordable Energy. And our other comment is from Katrina Caston Hill. And her comment reads, "Hello, thank you for hosting this wonderful event. I'm sure that Hurricane Ida has made a huge impact on the state. Financially, the state took a hit. Now that we know our electrical grids are not well maintained or able to withstand hurricane winds, will the state find a way to subsidize solar? Solar should be subsidized through Louisiana, beginning with our coastal communities." Signed, Katrina Caston. And with that, I will hand it back over to our chair. Those are the comments we received.
Wow. Thank you so much. And thank y'all for those comments. And we take the direction to heart that we should be doing more outreach, making sure that folks know a lot more about this. So thank you for that comment and for all the 15 organizations who signed on to that. And also to Kanitra's comment, are we investing in solar? It's a great question. And I think one that we should consider as we're finishing our final recommendations as an Equity Advisory Group. So thank you so much. And my thanks to all of you who are still recovering from Hurricane Ida. Our prayers and good energy are with you. We are the strongest, best people on the planet who come from Louisiana. That means we will survive and we will get to the next level. But we've got to save and move our state into a more democratic process, which means more voices. So thank you for engaging here. We ask you to keep engaging in the future. There's more to come, and we thank you. Have a great evening. The meeting is hereby adjourned.
Thanks, everyone.
Appreciate y'all. Thank you.